The old cars sputtered through the streets of Royal Woods, Michigan. Every little sound made the loud family jump. The last thing they needed was for their car to break down and leave them stranded on the road, where they'd be at the mercy of whatever adults lingered within earshot. Inside the car, the only sounds that persisted were the sounds of the family's heartbeats, breathing, and Lily's cooing. She was being held by Lucy, who sat in Lincoln's lap, while Lana and Lola sat on Lynn's lap, and Lola held Walt the bird and Geo the hamster, while Lana held her pet frog, Hops, and Izzy, her lizard. Lisa sat on Clyde's lap, holding Charles. They soon passed the crashed airplane. Light gray smoke still slowly rose from the cracks and gas of the steel, while burnt bodies lay sprawled out only a few yards away. Lincoln, his younger sisters, and Clyde all huddled together at the sight of this. Lincoln had told his sisters about how he, his sisters, and friends had all witnessed the crash, which shocked his older sisters. They couldn't even imagine how terrifying that sight must have been, and they couldn't believe they didn't hear the plane crashing to the ground. They guessed it was probably because they were probably too far away. Still, his sisters marveled at how brave Lincoln and Clyde had been to move on and protect their younger lives after witnessing all kinds of hellish sights. As they passed the plane, Lincoln could swear he could have seen something poking out from a gap in the steel. He quickly set it out of his mind as they got further away from the wreckage. He told himself that it was just his overreactive imagination. Soon, they could see the elementary school in the distance. Images of Lincoln's dead classmates raced through his mind. He remembered the fear and hopelessness he felt as the adults tore into the poor, helpless kids. He wondered if anybody could still be alive in there. His question was immediately answered. "Look!" Luann shouted, pointing towards the roof of the school. Everyone looked and saw what appeared to be a figure standing on top of the school. "Is that a kid or an adult?" Lynn asked. "It's too short to be an adult," Luna answered. As they drove closer to the school, they could tell that the figure noticed them as well. They watched it turn and run out of sight. The closer they got to the school, the more details they noticed. All the windows seemed to be boarded up and barricaded. "Do you think—" Lynn began, but was quickly interrupted by Luann screaming, "Luna, look out!" They all turned and were shocked to see a group of about 30 adults charging towards the left side of the car. "Oh, shit!" Luna yelled. Everyone in the car began to scream as tall, shirtless, muscular adult chucked a brick at the car, leaving a large crack in the windshield. All the kids in the car screamed louder at the sound of the brick bouncing off of the car. There was no doubt in Luna's mind that the brick would have killed her if it made it through the windshield. She quickly shifted the car in reverse. As she backed up, she looked to see a bunch of grown-ups running towards the car from behind the well. She continued to back away as some of the adults were swept underneath the car, and another hung under the trunk of the car. She couldn't see what was going on, and then the car suddenly backed into a parked car. Luna cursed and shifted her car back into drive. The adults were beginning to surround the entire car and bang their fists on the windows, sending the kids into a panic frenzy. Then the shirtless adult from earlier prepared to launch another brick to the car. Luna slammed on the gas and ducked as the adult lobbed the brick again. It bounced away as it connected with the windshield again, and this time it took out a larger chunk of the front window. Luna kept her foot on the gas, and the adult jumped in the air before the car slammed into him to avoid being completely run over. Luna swore again as the adult clung under the hood of the car. The other adults weren't as smart as this one and were completely buried by it. Everyone in the car was shouting at Luna to be careful, but she was too pissed at the adult to listen to them. Unfortunately, the adult blocked her sight of the road. She swerved back and forth and then ended up clipping another parked car. It was enough to send the car to a halt, which caused the adult to fly off the hood. The damages were also enough to prevent the car from moving anywhere. Tears began to fill Luna's eyes as she frantically turned the keys into the ignition, but there was no life left in it. "This can't be it," she thought helplessly. "We didn't even make it that far from our house." Had Luna known that this was going to happen, she never would have let Lynn talk her out of leaving. "Look!" Lynn shouted, pointing towards the front doors of the school. A group of about 10 teens began to emerge from the building. They all seemed to be around Luna and Luann's age. A lot of them were carrying baseball bats and sharp sticks that are supposedly supposed to be spears. "Everyone, run for the school!" Luna demanded. They all exited the right side of the car since the adults were way too close to the left side of it. The kids had no choice but to leave their possession behind. Luann got out of the passenger side first, and her siblings soon leapt out from the back. As Lana and Lola hopped out of the car, they accidentally dropped their pets. Walt quickly flew away. Several adults clawed at the bird as he flew over them, but they all missed him. Gio's hamster ball bounced towards the adults. One of the grown-ups swooped up the hamster ball. He became frustrated as he and the other adults tried to get the ball open. Apparently they forgot how to open a simple hamster ball, so instead the adults began to slam the ball on the ground repeatedly until it broke open. All the adults fought over the hamster, tearing several small pieces from the poor, defenseless little animal. "Gio!" Lola screamed as Lynn dragged her and Lana away. Lana managed to break free from Lynn's grasp. She had to save her pet frog and lizard. Ignoring her sister's shouts, she ran up to her pets that were trying to flee from the adults. She reached down towards them when suddenly a lofty adult wearing a mechanic's outfit stomped down on Hops, causing the frog's eyeballs to pop out of their sockets, and swooped Izzy up and then bit down and ripped her head off. "No!" Lana cried. The adult looked down at her with a hint of satisfaction slowly forming on his face. It was as if he knew that he was tearing Lana up inside. Lana watched as the adult chewed slowly and forcefully, savoring the moment. Lana began to reach for her wrench that was attached to her tool belt when Luna came up from behind and lifted her up. "Are you nuts?" she yelled, and began to run, carrying Lana towards the school before the younger sister could say anything. "Hops! Izzy!" Lana cried again. As the adult became further away, the proud look on his face grew as he continued to chew. As they all ran towards the school, Lincoln and Clyde recognized a kid that was holding the door open and waved them inside. "Rusty," Lincoln and Clyde both said. The zit-faced kid smiled as they drew closer. Luann reached for the doors first. Once inside, she looked back to make sure her siblings made it in safely too. Lisa made it through the doors, first followed by Lucy, who was carrying a crying Lily. Lincoln and Clyde then made it into the building with their dog, Charles, right beside them, followed by Lynn, who was dragging a sobbing Lola. Finally, Luna reached the doors, carrying a tearful Lana. They all looked out as the kids who ran out to defend them began to make their way back towards the school, after realizing that their newcomers were safe. Rusty slammed the door shut just as the adults reached them. An older kid quickly placed an iron bar between the door handles while another one wrapped it with chains and latched a lock onto them. Lincoln, his siblings, and Clyde all breathed heavily as adults began to beat on the doors. The sound filled the hall, causing the newcomers to jump. "Don't worry, they're not getting in," said a kid. The Loud family all looked to see a smiling face look at them. "Stan?" Luna and Luann both said. It's good to see that you made it," Stan said. They all looked around the room. It was dark because the windows were all boarded up. A candle added the only source of light. "Thanks," was all Luna and her siblings could say. Stan's smile grew. "Don't mention it." "I'm sure glad to see you guys," Rusty said. Lincoln and Clyde both turned towards him. "Same here," said Lincoln, as they all high-fived each other. "Were you able to find your sister?" Luna asked Stan. "Yeah, she's safe in the gymnasium." Luna's mind then shifted back about how close she was to dying. "They ambushed us. One of them threw a brick at us." "Yeah, we call that one brick," Stan told them. Lana began to sob. "One of them was wearing a mechanic uniform, killed my pets." She buried her head against Luna's chest. Luna patted her on the back. Stan turned to her. "Yeah, we call that one Grease Monkey." They all continued to look around the room. "How did you do this?" Luna asked. The smile withdrew from Stan's face. "It wasn't easy. Me, Duke, and Joey were able to kill off a lot of adults. Turns out those two really know how to put up a fight." Soon their teens showed up, and we managed to kill all the adults in the school. "Even Coach Pulaski?" Lincoln asked. "Yup," Stan answered. "When we found him, he was stuck in an air vent. It took a lot of us to pull him out, and once we began to make progress, Duke took a wooden broom handle that he had carved into a spear and stabbed him in the back to paralyze him, and then he put him out of his misery with a jab to the head." Lincoln looked at Clyde and then to his younger siblings. They all looked relieved to hear that Coach Pulaski would never be able to bother them again. Stan continued. "Next we used chains to lock up all the doors in the school, and then we used the wood from the wood shop room and the hardware store across the street to board up all the windows." Lincoln thought of all the windows in the school. "All of the windows?" he asked. "Well, not all of them," Stan answered. Once we ran out of boards and decided to stop taking trips to get more, we locked up the double doors leading to the hallways that were full of classroom windows we wouldn't be able to board up. Once that was finished, we dragged all the dead bodies to the roof and threw them off the school. Lincoln and everyone else couldn't believe how quickly they were able to accomplish all of that. But then again, when Lincoln and his siblings all worked together on a task, they got it done in no time. Like the time where Lori was babysitting them, and they had had enough of her not letting them do anything, so he convinced his siblings to ambush her and leave her tied up to a chair. That way they could all do whatever they wanted to. The only problem was that they ended up trashing the house, and Lincoln quickly got fed up with their behavior and decided to apologize to Lori and let her be in charge again. She ended up telling them that Mom and Dad were on their way home. That prompted his siblings to abandon their bad, destructive behavior and quickly start cleaning up the house. The house went from disaster zone to a perfect example of cleanliness in a matter of minutes. "So, where is everyone?" Luna asked. "A lot of kids usually hang out in the gym," said Stan. "Others sit around in the auditorium. In fact, I think that's where Duke is right now. Let me take you to him." "Duke? Duke Melville? Is he in charge?" "Yes," Stan answered. "He'll definitely want to meet you all." Luna dreaded the fact that Duke Melville was the kid in charge. After all, he was kind of an asshole. He always had to get his way, like the times where she was in gym class and Duke didn't like the way a certain played to a game they were playing, so he went off to go with his team. And when Luna was younger, she was partnered up with them for a group project. He hardly ever let her get a say in anything, and once they turned their project in, they got a B-. Duke wasn't happy. He ended up blaming her for what he considered to be a failure. And since Duke was in charge, that probably meant that Joey was second in command. He could just be as obnoxious as Duke. He was like a yes man to him, always hyping him up and going along with whatever stupid things Duke was getting into. "Alright then," Luna said, faking a smile. They all waited until everyone was calmed down. Luna sat Lana down and Lucy handed Lily to her as Stan, another kid named Jeremy, and Rusty escorted them to the auditorium, while the other teens dispersed. As they continued down the hall, they passed some small groups of teens who loitered in the hallway. A lot of them watched without saying anything as the Loud siblings passed them. However, some of them did smile, while others shot them looks of sympathy, because everyone knew who the Loud family was. They were probably the most well-known family in Royal Woods. They knew they were supposed to be 11 of them, but the teens counted 9 of them. Lincoln watched as smiles faded from some teens' faces once they figured out what that meant. They had to have figured out whatever this disease was. It only affected people 16 and older, which meant that the 2 oldest of the Loud siblings were likely dead. As they reached the auditorium, there were 2 teens leaning against the wall next to the doors. One of them noticed Lily. "Oh, great," he sarcastically remarked to himself, but the Loud family heard him and they all shot him fierce looks. The teen nervously looked away once he did that. "We're here," Stan announced. "We know," said Lynn. "We've all been here before." "Ah, right," Stan chuckled. He opened the door and took in everyone and everything that was in the auditorium. It was lit by candles as well, and there were kids spread throughout the room, and a lot of them were just sitting on chairs talking amongst themselves, while others were sleeping on the chairs. Stan led them to the stage where Duke sat on a throne that was probably a prop used in a play involving a king, and just as Luna predicted, Joey was right next to him, holding an axe, sitting on the folding chair that didn't look anywhere near as comfortable as the seat Duke rested on. As they got closer to the stage, Duke looked up and his facial expression changed from a bored to a look of annoyed confusion. He sat up and was about to say something when suddenly a kid sitting on the edge of the stage pointed at the Loud family and spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Cheaper by the dozen, Steve Martin, Bonnie Hunt, Piper Perrell, Tom Welling, Hilary Duff, Kevin J. Schmidt, Allison, Luna Mum." "Be quiet, Randy," Duke told the kid before he could finish. The Loud family were confused by the kid's random outburst, which woke up some of the sleeping teens. Now everyone noticed the guest that stood before the stage. Luann recognized the kid. His name was Randy Whisk. He was the same grade as her. Whenever he saw something that reminded him of a certain movie, he would say it out loud and start naming actors from certain movies. However, he would only say the name of actors that were well known, or at least had one acting credit to their name in the last year, which is a point he made when somebody mentioned the movie Napoleon Dynamite, a movie where pretty much everyone was in the credits. Whenever Randy started to rant, all you had to do to get him to stop was to simply say, "Be quiet, Randy," and that would shut him up. Meanwhile, the other siblings had no idea. They thought that they would just be stating the obvious about a movie they were several people mentioned whenever the Loud family came up in a conversation. Duke then turned back to the group. Stan, where did they come from? He asked, pointing a spear at the fresh faces. Jeremy saw them traveling in a car, and he went and got me. They were attacked by Brick and his gang, Stan told Duke. So I took a group of kids and helped them out. You should have told me first before you went out there, said Duke. Stan raised an eyebrow. There was no time. You took a huge risk, dude. Do you have any idea how terrible it would have been if Brick and his gang got in here? Before Stan could say anything, Rusty spoke up. Lincoln and Clyde are my friends. There was no way I was going to let anyone leave them out there. Jeremy may have told Stan about the car, but when Rusty saw that it was Lincoln and his family inside the car, he convinced Stan to gather up a group and go out there and help them. Duke turned to the kid. Rusty, please let the grown-ups talk. You're only 4 years older than me, Rusty protested, and 4 years stronger, so watch your tone, Duke threatened. Look, said Stan, they're here now, so we should be welcoming them, not questioning how dangerous it was to open the doors. Well, we have a good thing going, said Duke. How can we trust that they won't cause trouble? Oh yeah, we'd hate to ruin your well-oiled machine, Len finally spoke up, raising an arm and acknowledging everyone that was slouching in their seats. Duke's gaze shifted towards the girl. He stared daggers into her, but she didn't budge. Do you have any idea how hard it was to take this place? He began. He told them what Stan had told them earlier. We even had to move a bus outside into the school from the loading dock. The lads were impressed to hear that. Behind the auditorium, there was a large door that vehicles could pull into whenever they had to make a large delivery. Most of it involved things for plays. Since the power no longer worked, Duke and his crew had to pull on chains to lift the door, and when others moved the school bus in. It was an old bus, so it was able to survive the epidemic. The only problem was that how they could fix it up. It needed gas, its engine needed repairing, and it needed new tires. Look, Luna spoke up, breaking the intense atmosphere. We can help you. I'm sure that you can find us useful. What skills could you all possibly have to offer us? Luna thought for a second. Luna was a musician, not very useful for survival, but she was sure that there were other skills that she could be used to be proven useful. Lily was just a baby, so she was out of the discussion. Loanne, however, was good with pranks. Maybe she could set up traps for the adults. Lynn was very athletic and a tough girl, so she could be quite the useful in a fight. Although Luna hated the thought of any of her siblings fighting infected adults, Lincoln was always coming up with plans and stuff like that. He could be a strategist or something. She wasn't sure what Clyde could do. Lucy knew a lot up in how the body and mind work. She could also contact spirits, apparently. Not sure what good that would do, though. Lana was a very useful handyman. She could help with the plumbing in the school and maybe fix up the bus. Lola may have been a pageant girl before all this, but she knew how to cook and sew. And then there was Lisa. Lisa, of course. Lisa was a genius, probably the smartest person in the world. If anyone could come up with a cure for the disease, it would be her. Luna told Duke everything that just went through her head. His eyes lit up when he realized that Lisa was a goldmine of knowledge. Okay, you can stay, he said, standing up. Stan, give them a little tour of the school and then let them settle into the gym. Stan put his right hand on his forehead in a saluting gesture. Aye, aye, Captain. Duke watched as Stan led the kids out of the auditorium. His gaze was especially fixed on the little brown-haired girl with glasses. She was his golden ticket. He'd finally remembered how smart Lisa was. She was always in the headlines. Sometimes it was good news, like how she created something useful, or bad news like a robot that she created that went on a rampage. There was no doubt if she figured out exactly what was going on with the adults and then come up with a cure, she would be a hero. And so would he. The dude who took her in, sheltered her, and gave her whatever she needed to help her find a cure. He turned to Joey and smiled. This should be good. Stan led the new kids into the school. The Lau family thought it was silly since they already knew where everything in the school was. However, there were some fresh takes on some of the rooms. One of the rooms, a science lab, was occupied by a kid that Luna recognized as Brain Allen, the second smartest kid in Royal Woods, Michigan. There was also an adult chained to a table. They were shocked to see this. Don't worry, he's not going anywhere, Stan laughed. The teen noticed the visitors intruding in his space. Stan, what are you doing here? Brian scolded. I told the guards not to let anyone in. What guards? Brian sighed. Those lazy, impotent... He stopped when he noticed Lisa. Lisa Marie Loud. Everyone looked at the younger Loud. Brian walked up to her. It is you. I'm glad to see you. Lisa didn't know the kid, but he sure knew her. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said, holding out a hand. Lisa didn't shake it. Brian slowly moved his hand away, embarrassed, and he noticed some of them were still staring at the chained-up adult that he explained to them that it was studying, hoping to find whatever was causing the adults to go mad. I've taken blood samples, skin samples, saliva samples, hair samples, even stool samples. So far, I haven't even come up with much information. The Loud family winced when Brian mentioned stool samples. It reminded them of Lisa's weird poop studies. It also meant that these things also pooped. Lisa and Brian should get along just fine, Lincoln thought. I sure hope you will be able to help me figure something out, Brian told Lisa. You could save a lot of people. Lisa thought of her classmates and of Darcy. The fact that she couldn't save them constantly gnawed at her. There was nothing that she wanted more than to figure out how this disease worked and put a stop to it. Of course, Lisa answered. I'll get right on it. Excellent, Brian cheered. I'll give you a day to settle in and then we can get right to work. Very well, Lisa nodded, and then continued the tour with their family. Next, Stan showed them the cafeteria. Luckily there were some stoves that ran on gas so they could still cook food, although they were running low. They had been sending people out to scavenge, and since they were only a week into the new world, a lot of stores still had plenty of fresh food and supplies. Then he showed them the nurse's office. There was an Indian kid reading a book behind the nurse's desk. A single candle lit the room. Stan introduced them. This is Sanjay Basi. His dad was a doctor before the apocalypse, and he was always making Sanjay study to become one too, so he's pretty much the closest thing we have to a doctor here. Hello, he said, looking up from his book, which they could tell was some sort of medical book. They all introduced themselves. Next, Stan showed them the doors that were chained up. We don't know what's behind those doors, so it's best just to stay away from them. Finally, after showing them some other rooms and empty classrooms, some of which were Lincoln's sister's classroom that had bloodstains on the floor, they made it to the gym. This is pretty much where everyone sleeps, he said. You're allowed to hang out with any people of the opposite gender, but when it's bedtime, boys sleep on one side of the gym and girls sleep on the other. However, if you have younger siblings on the opposite gender, you're allowed to sleep next to them, but only them. They all nodded. Lincoln was relieved to hear that. Stan opened the double doors to the gym and everyone looked at the new arrivals entering the room. The Louds studied all the faces that studied them. There seemed to be around 50 kids in the gym. A lot of them seemed happy to see Lincoln and his siblings. Others seemed surprised. Lincoln saw a lot of faces that he recognized as Stan led them to an unoccupied gap in the room. He saw where his friend Rusty was reading and his little brother Rocky. He also saw his other friend Zachary along with a few of his other classmates. Lincoln looked over to where a group of girls were sitting. He saw a girl Jordan, Molly, Penelope, and the girl who got bit in the cheek by Mrs. Johnson. It was stitched up. Lincoln was relieved to see that she was still alive. It meant that getting bitten didn't turn you into a zombie, or whatever the fuck those things were. He also saw Christina looking at him. Their eyes met, and Lincoln slowly kept moving his head to make it look like he was scanning the room instead of looking at her. He used to have a crush on her, and sometimes he acted out kissing her on Lucy's statue of Edwin. One day, he uploaded the video to the internet in order to make things right when he recorded his sister's most embarrassing moment so he could win an award to get put in the Loud family trophy case. That day seemed like a million years ago. Lincoln was sure that he was the least of her worries now, but he still felt awkward looking at her. He then looked over to the bleachers and saw Chandler and this reputable group of friends. Lincoln couldn't believe that he was somewhat glad to see that he was still alive. It really spoke volumes of the situation. I guess this is where you girls will be sleeping. Stan pointed as they stood at the girls' side of the gym. The ground was covered with gym mats that had been laid out. Pillows and blankets had been tailored using supplies from the home economics room. Stan then pointed to where Lincoln and Clyde would sleep. He also told Lincoln that he could sleep next to his sisters in the girls' side of the room if he chose to, but he had to sleep between his older sisters. Unfortunately, Clyde wouldn't be able to sleep next to the Loud sisters since they weren't related. The Loud family felt bad. Clyde had no one. Lincoln told Clyde that after he and his siblings got settled in, he'd sleep next to him from then on. It'll be like a permanent sleepover, he said. That made Clyde smile. Stan, a little voice called out. They all looked to see a dark-haired girl running up to Stan. Hey, Sally, he said to her as he jumped into his arms. Stan introduced them to his sister. She was a small 7-year-old. She always gets excited when I come back, no matter how short I've been gone. Stan told them about how he and his friends found Sally, and a bunch of other little kids hiding in the storage closet. He told them that protecting the little kids gave them all the incentive they need to power through the crazy adults. His story reminded Lincoln of how he had put his life on the line to protect his sisters. Stan then told everyone else in the room to make his new guests feel welcome. They were all family now. He then told the newcomers if they needed anything else to ask Trinity. He pointed to a tall, pretty 14-year-old blonde girl on the other end of the room who was watching over a lot of the younger kids. She waved at them and then turned her attention back to the kids. He eventually stepped out to resume his duties, whatever they were, and left the newcomers in the auditorium with a bunch of other kids and a few big kids that were also watching over the little ones. But Trinity seemed to be the only one who was actually seeming interested in watching the kids. A few kids walked up to Lincoln, Clyde, and siblings to say hi to them and to ask them what it was like out there and how they survived. Once that was done, Molly, the girl who Lincoln and Clyde had kind of rescued from the school's secretary, walked up to them smiling. She hugged them and thanked them for saving her from Cheryl. Then she walked back over to her group of friends as Lincoln went back to her sisters to see them smiling at him. "What, she's just a friend," he said, and he meant it. "Okay," they all said in a playful tone. Lincoln groaned. Apparently not even an outbreak of infected adults could stop his sisters from obsessing over whenever a girl so much as smiled at him. That's when Lincoln thought of Ronnie Ann. Was she alright? She lived several miles away with her extended family. He couldn't have been able to imagine what it had been like for her. A lot of her relatives were well over the age of 16, but what about her younger cousins? There was no way any of them could have survived attacking adults, but she could be strong enough. Brave enough? As far as Lincoln could guess, she was either dead or probably surviving with a ragtag group of teens who were just as tough as she was. Lincoln continued to look around the room. "I guess this is our home now," he said. A few hours passed since Lincoln, his siblings, and Clyde arrived at the school. The adults that had attacked them earlier dispersed. Lincoln's older siblings and a few other teens were able to gather up some of their things from Mr. Gruse's car. The main goal had to get Lisa's science supplies. They found a crib for Lily to sleep in that wasn't in the child development room. They also had some diapers that they had brought with them, but eventually they were going to run out and they'd have to use newspapers. A while later, Stan offered to take them to the roof and show them where the pots were set up. They were plant seeds to grow food, and once they reached the roof, they were more interested in looking out at the town of Royal Woods than they were in fruits and vegetables growing in the dirt. From there, they could all see the devastation that had resulted from the plague. There were crashed cars littering the street, bones scattered everywhere, some smoke billowing in the distance, bloodstains in the streets, smashed windows on houses and doors, and dead adults lying in the streets. Apparently adults didn't eat other adults. They all held each other as they thought of their friends and families and lives they left behind. They were never going to have normal lives again. The kids were responsible for themselves now. No parent was ever going to make them feel safe. No adult was ever going to look after them. No teacher was going to teach them. And they had taken that all for granted. Their parents loved them, cared for them, and worried for them. But now they were stuck in their parents' jobs. The older kids were the parents now. They thought they had their old lives to look forward to, dreams to set up, goals to accomplish, wishes to come true. But it was all gone now. They were all lost. "Alright, start talking," Chris demanded as he and the adult sat across each other, with Chris pointing his Glock 19 at the adult. He asked the adult if they could be killed, and the answered truthfully. Yes, they could. Other than that, they couldn't die of old age. Once they took control of a body, the body stayed that way forever. The adult wanted to tell him that the gun wasn't necessary, but decided not to. He continued to tell Chris everything he knew. "We have traveled several light years, searching for a planet with suitable host. One we could call home." "Suitable host?" Chris asked. "Yes, a planet where we could take control of the people's minds, gain their knowledge, and consume their young ones." "Who's we?" "The microorganism that reside on that meteor that exploded over your planet." "Why weren't kids infected?" Chris asked. "Their brains weren't developed enough for us to take control." "What happens when they get old enough?" "Nothing," the adult answered. "Once the meteor explodes, we linger in the air for only a few hours, and if we can't find anyone to take control of, then we're shit out of luck." "Why do you eat kids?" "We require the flesh of the organisms living on the planet to keep our minds fresh. If we fail to do so, we become dumb. We will begin to fail at the most basic of things, such as walking straight, opening doors, wielding weapons. If that happens, we have to rely on the smarter ones to guide us. Ones that have consumed the most flesh out of the group, which is probably why the blast didn't affect you. You already had the flesh of your species flowing through you." "Interesting," thought Chris. "How am I able to hear your voice in my head? Can you speak to each other telepathically?" "Yes," the adult answered. "That's how I knew you were in here. I heard your thoughts. I could sense your brainwaves going off at tremendous amounts of energy. You give off the most powerful vibe out of any of the adults I have encountered, even though I've only been on this planet for about a week." So that's why he was able to hear the other adults. So what happened to the people whose bodies you've taken over? Do they know they're possessed or something? I don't know, the adult answered. Can you remember anything about the person's life you've taken over? Like, what was his name? The adult pondered the question. Just bits and pieces, he answered. And as for the name, I don't remember. Chris began to hear more voices speaking in his mind. They were all calling out to him. It sounds like you got quite the audience growing outside. Chris got up and peered outside his window. There were about 100 adults standing outside of his house. Each of them were carrying pieces of dead kids. They need a leader, the adult told Chris. A leader, huh? Chris liked the sound of that. He looked back at the adult and smiled. Okay, he said. You'll be my second in command, so I'm going to call you Crony from now on. Crony smiled his creepy smile. Okay. Chris stepped out on the porch and the adults continued to gaze upon him with yearning stares. He was their leader. Chris wondered what he should do first. Be quiet, he ordered. The voices in his head stopped. Everyone jump exactly one time, Chris demanded. They all jumped, even Crony. Some of them even seemed to have trouble. They were probably the weaker ones. Jump again. They all jumped again. Jump 10 times. They did just that. Some of them fell over, though, but the clumsy stood back up. Punch yourselves in the face. The yard was filled with the sounds of fists connecting to faces. Chris's heart was pounding with joy as he thought of another command. Kneel to me. Everyone fell to one knee. Chris smiled to himself. This was too good to be true. He could use this army to gather up kids to eat for himself. Far as he knew, there were no other cannibals in Michigan before the blast, so no other adult would be as powerful as he was. Yes, he said to himself, this should be really good.
In fear and surprise, as your eyes widen, your mouth goes dry with each battered breath. You try to scream, your mind begs to thee, glued to your computer screen. The killers they slash, the tapes burn and crash. The cartridge you bought will be your final haunt. The rituals of hate will seal your fate. The tears you shed will be from the fear-gripping horde-driven nightmarish gore-filled, terrorizing, hateful, burning, violent, rage-inducing, knife-slashing, blood-splattering, silent screams. Only time will tell if you will escape this online hell. Your horror-filled obsessions will come with its own regressions. Your pathetic screams will not be heeded in any way, because your nightmares will come at any day.